Hello everyone. So this is a season for strategy sessions. You find a lot of videos being posted on a daily basis on the next 6 month strategy, 7 month strategy. And I just wanted to make sure that this does not turn out to be yet another strategy session. But instead, I would want this session to be a sort of an introspection session. If you have not been successful in the previous prelims, I would say that simply following another borrowed strategy for the next 6 months is not going to do any change to your nature and the outcomes of your preparation. So instead, I would want you to introspect. I would want you to ask yourself these 5 questions that I have posted here on the very first slide. And I believe it's not having an answer to these 5 questions which would make you fail once again in an attempt if these unaddressed deficiencies still carry on to the next 6 months. So that is what I thought should be the purpose of this session. And let's get into the session and let me walk you through all these different 5 points that you need to ask yourself. So I believe aspirants fail in this preparation not because they are short of knowledge. It's not because those who crack have some secret knowledge which others don't have. These are not the larger reasons as to why you continuously fail. If you fail in one prelims, yes, it can be understood that you are short of knowledge what others have. But if you have been failing in multiple prelims, I think the reasons are different. So let's start with the first reason. I think the most important reason is that aspirants don't really understand how this examination process itself works, how this examination and the nature of questions asked, what does it really expect out of you. If you are not able to figure it out, there's no going to be success in prelims, right? And the very first misconception that aspirants can do when it comes to this exam preparation is coming up with a wrong understanding of the importance of subjects. I would simply say that all subjects are equally important. So come over this mindset that some subject is less important, some subject is more important, because that's how I see the narration on social media, where they give excessive importance to polity and environment science and modern history, whereas medieval and ancient history are not given that equal importance. Often those videos, they sideline the importance of ancient and medieval India, right? And there's also excessive importance given to the focus on static is the king, static is what you need to prepare. But there are again checks here. It's not that all static questions can be got right. And similarly, what if only 20% questions are even asked from modern India, which is the trend in the last 2 years? I think UPSC is moving to a scenario where equal importance is given for both ancient and medieval India as well, right? So that's why I would say simply come over all these analysis. Just throw these analysis to the dustbin, because there is no such thing called as a trend when it comes to UPSC. Yes, there could be no questions asked in one particular subject one year, but that does not have to be a trend. And what is asked last year need not be asked in the upcoming year, because last year there were questions asked about the textbook, the book that was published by our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. Similarly, 2 or 3 questions were asked about the hierarchy in armed forces. So it's no guarantee that such kind of questions will be asked next year. Those are not questions for the general audience. Those are questions for those who are anyway interested to know about the armed forces. And it's not that everybody should start getting into the depth of the hierarchy and the regimentation of armed forces. That's not at all going to be useful, right? So that's why all these kind of analysis which points out to you how many questions have been asked previous year, I think it's all meaningless, because it's no guarantee that the same number of questions from that particular subject may be repeated in the upcoming years. There is no guarantee that the 20 questions asked in polity in 2024 is going to be repeated once again. We may only find 10 questions in the upcoming year coming from polity, whereas the weightage of geography can significantly increase. So that's why, just because you want a comfortable reason to focus on certain subjects, it doesn't really reflect the reality. So these kind of analysis or tables or such kind of opinions being given that one subject predominates civil services examination, I think you should not even listen to it, because that will get into you a wrong understanding, and you will start excessively devoting time to a particular subject, right? So that's why first come over this thought that there is a set pattern to UPSC. No, you can get a broad trend about the difficulty of UPSC. Maybe in the last 3 years there could be a trend of UPSC following a different standard of questions, right, where all your elimination methods, they don't seem to be as effective as how it earlier used to be, right? So such kind of broad trends can be understood, but you don't have to read too deep into the data regarding the number of questions and from the area of questions being asked by UPSC. Just make up your mind that you have to focus on all subjects, right? But I'm not saying that you have to focus blindly into the depths and the span of every subject. That's not what I'm trying to point out, but I'm just trying to simply say that your weakness in one subject is not an excuse for totally neglecting a particular subject, hoping that less number of questions from the subject has been asked in the last few years. If you actually see the questions asked in mains this year, for the last 3-4 years there was not a single question asked from world history in mains, but this year all of a sudden some 2 questions have been asked from world history out of 20 questions. So 10% has been asked from world history alone, right? And those students who did not prepare world history well will definitely be impacted. Whether not preparing for world history alone is going to change the outcomes of mains, no, that's not what I'm talking about. But when it comes to prelims, who knows, the subject that you find today as your weakest subject could become your strongest subject over a period of time. So the next 6 months you have to plan it in such a way that you don't leave anything drastically weak, right? And that can only happen if you actually align your thoughts to the reality of this examination. So you should actually come out of this misconception that the 3 subjects are the ones which actually dominate this examination. It's nowhere written in the pattern of UPSC examination to have excessive dominance in a certain set of subjects, right? So make your mind clear. So set your mind clear, and it's only with that clarity you can even proceed further. And the next point which I would like to talk to you about is the requirement of different approach across different subjects. You cannot use the same approach of reading from Lakshmikant all the time. That cannot be the approach that you use for economy or for science and tech. Because when you don't have a very strong material to depend upon, the time that you excessively devote reading some random PDF or some 100 pages of content on economy is not actually worthwhile, right? So that's why you need to actually figure out the difference in the approach when you study different subjects. So for that, if you take the questions of polity that are asked, let's say in the last 2 years, in 2023 and 2024, so 2024 questions, most of them can be handled simply by reading Lakshmikant. You don't have to read anything beyond that. But that's not the case with the questions of 2023. And to get the questions of 2023 right, you need to have sufficiently prepared for your mains as well. It's the concepts, it's the judicial interpretations behind the constitutional articles. It's only when you're clear about all those aspects, you will be able to get a majority of the polity questions right in both the years, 2023 and 2024. So what if the nature of questions next year happens to be centered around the nature of questions as how it was asked in 2023, right? So that's why you need to follow these 2 approaches, approach 1 and approach 2. So the first approach is where you simply need re-exposures from the same standard textbooks again and again, right? And if you would have been very familiar with most standard textbooks, getting a majority of the questions from polity into 2024 would become easier. And all those NCERT and standard textbook based questions asked in history could have also been answered if only you're familiar with your NCERTs. And all you need is just get into the nook and corner of those standard textbooks. There could be some 6 NCERTs for history. There could be simply Lakshmikant and 1 or 2 more NCERTs. If you're perfectly thorough with that, yes, you are actually increasing the chances of getting the questions right from NCERTs. But again, that's not the entirety of preparation, right? The reason is because, as I said, as 2023 questions reveal to us, you also need certain mains linkages if at all such questions are asked in the next year, right? I'll give you an example for that. So these are 2 questions asked in 2023 prelims, and these are not answers that you can actually get simply by reading Lakshmikant. You need to have gotten into the main syllabus. You should have had some kind of a preparation, maybe read some good content on the mains aspects of your syllabus sheet. If you have done that, then getting these 2 questions is possible, correct is possible, right? If not, you cannot actually simply get these 2 questions right. And these 2 questions are not so difficult. For an aspirant who has given some time into mains preparation, both these questions, 4 marks, can simply be easily got, right? And these are all the marks, these are all the factors which make some aspirants clear prelims, whereas some are not able to do that, right? So that is the reason why I say, when you prepare for polity, make sure your mains preparation regarding the constitutional provisions are also well addressed. At the same time, you reach a certain level of perfection with respect to recollection from the provisions from whatever is there in Lakshmikant, correct? It's these 2 approaches combined which can ensure a guaranteed outcome of success in polity questions in your prelims. So is that all? Does it mean that simply being very good with your standard textbooks can give you a good success in polity and history? I would say, at least with respect to history, you need to go a lot beyond your standard textbooks. A lot of questions are asked out of your standard textbooks, and I would say that it's not a very wise idea to simply just close your eyes towards such kind of questions. You need to prepare as much as possible. And that's where the role of tests can actually be very, very helpful. Because for history questions, you have some ideas given in your NCRTs, but there are just so many things which may have been skipped with NCRTs because NCRTs are written for school children, right? And the UPSC wouldn't really want to make the books very bulky and cumbersome, so a lot of aspects would have been left out, which would be present in the optional level textbooks. So that doesn't mean that I'm asking each one of you to go to the optional textbooks and start reading each chapter page by page, but at least if such kind of questions from optional level textbooks can be captured in the form of tests, why not utilize them? At least get to the level of the questions which are asked in your test series. And being very good with, let's say, some 200 or 300 questions from history that are asked beyond your textbooks can definitely help you in coming up with certain associations, with certain linkages, with certain conjectures. And that will all be the factor which will help you get another 3 or 4 more questions in your prelims go right. Correct? So this kind of an approach would work very well for questions from history and geography, because I don't really think polity questions can ask anything outside of your constitutional articles, right? So from the first article to the last, whatever is there, it's only within that all your polity questions are to be asked. Maybe some may not directly ask you about the constitutional provision. It could test your understanding of the concept underlying the constitutional provision. Whereas when it comes to history and geography, there is so much beyond your standard textbooks. It's only the optional students of history and geography will be aware of this fact. That's why it makes a much better reason to take a lot of tests so as to get new exposure to questions from history and geography, and at least attend those discussion, and at least to the level of having answers for those questions. If you can be well prepared, even that would be helpful for you. And then there are subjects like environment, which really requires you a lot of new exposure. So what do I mean by this new exposure? Yes, it is necessary that you have to do at least 1 or 2 readings of your basic environment textbook. It could be Shankar's environment textbook. You read 1 or 2 readings of it. Be good with the larger concepts, right? Whatever is given there, just to that extent of whatever you can remember, be familiar with the concepts. And be aware that there is a long distance beyond your standard textbook to be done when it comes to environment preparation. Because most questions that are asked from environment as well as from science and tech, they don't get confined only to your NCRT textbooks and standard textbooks. Of course, the knowledge is important. So confine your preparation to NCRTs to the level that you are aware of the ideas. But don't spend the same amount of time that you spend on revising Lakshmikant. That's not the approach towards your NCRTs or with respect to Shankar's textbook for environment. 1 or 2 readings, then understand that there is much more distance to cover in the form of latest happenings, which you will anyway encounter from your Hindu newspaper, right? Take cues out of Hindu newspaper, go beyond that, browse extensively, and try to connect a lot of articles regarding similar concepts whichever you read, right? So try to make all those connections, and that's the way how you prepare for environment. So preparing for environment and science, it's just 1 or 2 readings of your NCRTs to get a broad level understanding about the physics of sound, physics of light. Be clear about that, but try to cover everything that has been in the news in the last 1 or 2 years, right? And this is where current affairs compilations can actually be useful if you have been reading Hindu newspapers regularly. Okay, simply forgetting to read Hindu newspapers regularly, hoping that current affairs alone will come as your savior, that's again not a right approach. If you have been reading Hindu newspapers regularly, you are actually familiar with broad themes. And when you read current affairs compilations, you will be able to understand which is important, which you should focus upon, and to what depths from current affairs compilation should you actually take in, right? Because there's just so much of depth, so much of content that's given in current affairs compilations. If you start focusing on each and every word in those compilations, then you're going to be drowned in the noise, whereas you're going to miss out on the core substance. So that's why I say having a anchoring with the daily habit of reading newspaper can really help you in filtering the noise from the substance. And that's the only way you can actually pick out only the essentials that are required to be read from the current affairs compilations, right? So that's why I insist on a lot of new exposure beyond your NCRTs and Shankar textbook for environment. Beyond that, you need new exposures, and that's what comes in the form of newspaper as well as compilations, plus top it up with your test series, right? So make use of every opportunity in the form of newspaper, compilations, and test. All three are your opportunities to get exposure to newer areas, right? So these are the different approaches towards different subjects, and you should be the best judge as to if you already are in this right direction, or if you really need some classes to supplement your understanding of these subjects. So there is no straitjacket formula which is applicable for somebody of a topper's caliber who cracks this exam every year from somebody who feels that they are not very strong with all these subjects and all these areas. So whether you need classes support, whether you need some crash course or some courses to complete all these areas, it's something that only you should take a call on that, right? Just because an all India rank 1 says that for you don't need to take classes beyond your foundation, well, that may not be truly applicable to everybody. So you decide what's your relative strength, and strengthen your weaker areas more, either by your own efforts or by the efforts of some good faculty for all these subjects. The second aspect that you'll have to consider is, if your understanding of what is possible from a static area question and what is not possible even if the question is from a static area, do you have that clarity about it or not, is something that you have to think about, right? Because not all static area questions can be got right, especially if it's very factual. For example, this is a question that was asked in the year 2023 prelims, and the third statement and the fourth statement, they are very challenging statements. You really need a proper factual precision to get this question right. So just skip these kind of questions. It makes no sense to go and start memorizing the vote value of each MLA and MP from all different states. This kind of a question may not even repeat in the upcoming years. So this is the problem that is associated with blind dependence on previous year's questions. There is it's not prudential to simply know the answers of previous year question. So just understand that UPSC can also ask these kind of facts from static areas. So if these kind of questions are asked, I simply have to avoid attempting these questions. And this is another question which was asked in the year 2024 prelims, right? So even this kind of a question cannot be actually got right. You need extreme factual knowledge to get these kind of questions right. Okay, elimination, selection, all of that cannot come to your rescue in these kind of questions. These could be simply be a question asked from Lakshmikant, but it's not humanly possible to know which amendment has specifically added which languages to the 8th schedule, right? So do not worry about these kind of questions. So let's say if 100% out of 100% questions asked from static and polity, it is only possible to get 70 to 80% right. It is still impossible to get 20% correct. But that doesn't mean that many questions that prima facie it appears to be challenging, right? I'll give you an example of that. For example, you see these two questions asked in the year 2024 prelims. These two questions may appear to be very factual, right? Let's look at the question number 1 here. So this is a question asked about the constitutional paths. It's simply testing whether an aspirant has an idea about which ideas of the constitution, which provisions of the constitution come under which paths, right? I'm sure most aspirants will definitely know Part 9 and Part 9A of the Constitution were added as a result of 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts. So if that is the case, you can easily get the first option right. So we all know that Part 9A is where the powers of municipalities are given. Fine. But what about the second and third statements? It checks whether emergency provisions are there in Part 18. Third statement checks whether the amendment provisions are given in Part 20. Well, it appears prima facie to be too factual, so let me just leave it, move on to the next question, but you are actually missing out on a very good opportunity. And let me tell you how you could have actually got these questions right. I'm sure most aspirants, and since emergency happens to be a very easy chapter to read from Lakshmikant, you'll all be knowing that from 352 to 360, these are all emergency related provisions. And amendment is in Article 368. So these are close by provisions. These constitutional provisions are close to each other, right? And look at the options. All the options, they either have option 2 or option 3. So either of the two is correct. If 368 comes under Part 20 of the Constitution, it is very much possible that emergency provisions will come under Part 18 because they are so close to each other. Correct? So this is the way how you can approximate. You don't have to have exact factual precision here, but knowing that yes, these are close by provisions and the options seem to indicate that one of them is true, Such kind of an assumption can really help you get these kind of questions right. It prima facie looks very factual, but in reality it is looking at your ability to make these kind of approximations, right? So same is the case with money bill question that is asked. I'm sure all of us will know about option number 2, 3 and 4, standard Lakshmikant statements, right? But the challenging aspect is to know whether 109 mentions a special procedure with respect to money bills or not. The way to think about it is, we all know article 110 talks about money bills. To that extent, you should be really thorough. I'm sure all of us will be aware that 110 talks about money bills, and 109 is so close to that. And just imagine, why would constitution makers want to give a definition for 110 as money bill definition? Only because there could be something discussed about money bill in the preceding article, right? And you should also be aware that 112 onwards till 116, I think, largely talks about budgetary provisions, right? So it means that 110 happens to be something about money bill. We don't know what is 111. So it is possible that 111 or 109 could talk about the procedure that is followed in the passage of money bills. So you have to make this assumption that yes, it seems to be likely. Whereas if this article would have been article 72 talks about it, then you can blindly go select this as incorrect, because 72 is about executive. It has nothing to do with legislature, right? So it's not the exact factual precision that is being tested here. It is actually your ability to identify the range of constitutional provisions which is actually tested here. That's why assumptions like these can help you get these kind of questions right. So do not miss out on the chances of scoring well from these questions, which prima facie looks factual, but there could be some other reason to get these answers right. And a similar skill of arriving at conjectures can also be helpful in getting certain questions right. Right? So what is a conjecture? A conjecture is what you're not very certain, but there is a possibility that your thinking can arrive at a right answer. Okay, so look at question number 48. So the question number 48, it checks your knowledge about the different rulers of Vijayanagara, or at least that's how it appears to be when you prima facie when you look at this question. Correct? But it doesn't really expect you to know about each and every ruler of Vijayanagara. And I'm not even saying that you should have got it right. It is somewhere there in some NCRTs. That's not the way to approach this question. Just approach it by thinking about the story of different Vijayanagara kings. You know, the most significant Vijayanagara rulers are Harihara and Bukka, because they set a firm footing for Vijayanagara Empire, and they were followed by a few other great rulers like Devaraya the first, Devaraya the second, right? So you're aware of all of them, but towards the last days of the Sangama, you have a lot of insignificant kings of Vijayanagara, right? And these Virupaksha, Mallikarjuna, we know that they are the kings of the last years. They are the ones who were the last rulers of Sangama dynasty, after which it will be followed with the Saluvas and then the Tuluvas. So if you can only think on this basis, you will know that Mallikarjuna, Virupaksha, these are wasted guys. They did not really add anything meaningful to Vijayanagara Empire. So if that's the way, you can simply eliminate them. Mallikarjuna, Virupaksha, they would not have commissioned such a grand feat like constructing several kilometers long tunnel to carry river water. So these last days rulers could not have done that, and we wouldn't even have heard about Veera Vijaya wherever we have studied. So that leaves us with one great ruler among the options given, which would be Devaraya the first. So just go for that. Whereas if the same question would have been Devaraya the first, Devaraya the second, Krishna Devaraya, Ramaraya, if this would have been the options, I would probably leave this question unattempted. Correct? So there, such kind of logic conjectures cannot really work, because all of them are great rulers of Vijayanagara Empire. So a question which may appear to be challenging, it may not really be so, if only you are aware of all other aspects. So it's not the factual aspects which matter here, but your ability to connect the meaningful rulers from the insignificant rulers of Vijayanagara. Right? Same is the case with question number 40. You don't really need to know what Article 335 says, but you can always make a guess that no constitutional provision would go to the extent of defining a vague and abstract idea like efficiency of administration. Right? You cannot expect a very significant document like Indian Constitution, which sets a broad outline for the framework of government. You cannot expect such a document to go into a very vague idea like efficiency of administration. Why would a constitution define what is efficiency? What appears as efficient for some may not be efficient for another, right? So that's also another way how you can actually eliminate this particular statement. So this is not actually checking for your knowledge of Article 335. So this is what I mean by conjectures, thinking logically can help you get certain questions. So what am I trying to say as a result of this discussion? I'm simply driving home the point that not all static questions can be got right, but some static questions which appears to be factual, which appears as if it's a question that you should leave unattempted, may not really be so. There could be a way of getting certain questions right despite being unaware of the facts. So do not let go of those opportunities. That's the whole point of it. So train when you take your test series, train to observe such patterns in static questions. The very next aspect that I would like to talk about is the kind of approach that you have towards current affairs. You should be able to understand that current affairs are very wide, as well as they can go to any level of depth as you want it to be, right? And you should be aware that UPSC's questions that are asked, they check for the depth in familiar areas. Let's say all of us are very familiar with Amarkantak Hills, Seshasalam Hills, Vindhyas and Satpuras. But do we have the in-depth knowledge to get question number 9 correct on the day of the examination? Very questionable. And it's very easy to point out that Billigiri Rangans was in news. It was in news and so date in the month of May 2023. So it was asked. It's easy to point it out. But it's not possible to go and find out where does it really exactly lie, what are its boundaries. So such kind of depth is what most of us will lack. It's perfectly fine to not know the answer for these questions. You don't have to make blind attempts in all these questions. Simply leave it unattempted. Same is the case with the other question. That question number 38 that's here. Most of us would be aware of community reserves. But do we really know who is the actual authority who has control over community reserves? The chief wildlife warden of the state becomes a governing authority of such forests. Do we really get to that depths? Questionable. And what all activities is allowed in community reserves? Is it possible to remember each and every activity on the day of the exam? Again, impossible. So that's why when it comes to questions which appears to be familiar, it might be enticing, it may be tempting to go for an attempt in these questions, but it's very, very risky because you may not really know the depths. But at the same time, there are current affairs questions which is very superficially asked, right? So UPSC is not going into the details of Rafale aircraft, what is its payload capacity, what is its cruising altitude, right? What is its exact speed, right? That's not the details that UPSC goes, but rather it's a very broad question as to which of the following are 5th generation fighter aircrafts, right? And all these are very prominently in news. So you don't have to go to the depth of each of these aircrafts. You only simply need to know which belongs to the 5th generation fighter aircraft category, right? And any sensible aspirant, I'm sure metaverse was a very constant buzzword, right? Last 1 or 2 years, we've seen all the developments that were brought out by Mark Zuckerberg, right? He's creating virtually a totally different universe where you can own digital assets, where you can create land and buildings, and that can even be sold for prices, right? So this is actually what it's tested in question number 48. It's not going into what is the technology behind metaverse, right? No nuances of metaverse is being tested. So this is what I mean by span in areas which we don't encounter in our daily lives, which we don't encounter normally. Whereas elephants is something that we encounter normally. And that is why UPSC go to the depths of elephant by asking what is its pregnancy period, how many calves does it yield per calving, right? So all such depths are explored. Whereas for things that we just hear it in the passing, like metaverse or the different aircrafts across different countries, these are all just superficial level questions. And your responsibility is to get these kind of questions right and to just not worry about these kind of questions, correct? So when you read current affairs, just make sure in which areas you have to go to the depths and in which areas you need to simply have a maximum coverage, right? I have an example here in front of you. And a lot of students, I feel they spend unnecessarily excessive amount of time making notes out of current affairs, which are anyway not going to be useful for the exam. And anyway, even if it's asked from your notes, do you really think you can recollect from the notes that you have made 8 months back? Very difficult, right? So that's why you have to know what kind of areas UPSC would test for its extent, what kind of areas would UPSC go to check for its depths. It's only with that awareness you will be able to make proper notes, right? For example, these are all some of the points about Rafale aircraft, but you should know that you should stop from point 1 and 2. You do not have to get into these depths. Maybe it's useful to know that it is a supersonic flight, but you do not really need to know its exact speed at which it travels, right? To such extent, if you can have some idea, just point number one and point number two, if I can only know about this, so composite materials are used, fly by wire technology is used here, right? To that extent, if you can actually know about it, I would say that this will suffice to get your answers right. You don't really have to go into all those specifications and all those intricate details. That is what I'm trying to say. The next issue that I would like to address here is about your habits. Because I feel not getting an answer right on the day of the exam is not a knowledge issue, it's more of a habit issue. It's about all the wrong habits, wrong preparation behaviors that you would have picked up in the course of your preparation. And one such wrong, meaningless habit is simply taking a book and reading just for the sake of reading it. You simply take Lakshmikant and start reading it chapter by chapter. Maybe for the first time it's fine, but as the examination nears, merely opening a book and reading the chapters again, it is such a meaningless exercise. It is time wasted. Instead, I would simply prefer you to spend the time more meaningful, chatting with your friends, going for a movie, or just doing anything other than opening a book and read. Because whatever you read will not be retained after a week, right? So we all have a memory curve, and the memory keeps falling, it keeps dropping after a point of time. So it's your responsibility to raise it up again, and after some time it again starts following, raise it up again. And it's to raise these memory low points. That's why you need tests. Attempting a lot of tests, even on very familiar areas, is simply just going to brush your memory again, right? It's simply going to create that spark where you're able to recollect, go back to the textbooks, create a purpose. So when you have a reason to go back to the textbooks, your learning is much more effective. Whereas without a reason, if you simply were to open a textbook, read chapter by chapter, line by line, hardly anything remains after a week. But after a week, let's say you take a test, you know where your memory has failed. Now you immediately go back to your books, just focus on the selective part. And when your focus is very selective on certain parts alone, the chances of retaining what you read is much more higher than generally reading an entire chapter, right? So these are the reasons why you have to constantly exercise through tests. Tests are not only reasons to learn areas which you are not aware of until you take the test. That's not the sole purpose of tests. Tests are simply to keep on revising the already known areas. Okay, and without tests, I don't think any revisions will be meaningful, right? So that's why not whatever you read can be retained with the time, and not what you retain can actually be recollected on the day of the examination. It's to ensure all three align with each other. Your reading, retention, recollection, it all stays together till the day of the exam. So that's why avoid all those random readings just because you have been suggested to read some 300 page of some PDF of some academy for the purpose of knowing about economic concepts. See, you have already attended enough lectures on economy, you have already watched enough videos on economy, you are very good with ideas of capital formation, or let's say inflation. You know all the basics of that. So then why are you wasting your time simply opening a book and reading it, right? But instead take a test. There could be a fourth option which actually makes you wonder if your reading is right or wrong. It's with that purpose now you go back to your textbooks. That's the only way you can avoid non-purposeful reading. And this is more like a behavioral pattern, right? Every day if you take conscious attempts to avoid this non-purposeful reading, I'm sure every minute that you spend reading is going to be something valuable to you. You are ensuring only what you are able to recollect, only what you are able to remember in the next test. Only those aspects are going to be read whenever you open your textbook. And it's not like everything that you find printed in words is what you actually read, right? So the next time when you open a textbook, and if it's not the first reading that you are going to do, if that's the case, always ask a question: what are you doing in terms of opening the book? Is it simply a re-exposure, or are you creating a reason for re-exposure? Create a reason. That reason could be the awareness of your shortcomings in recollection. It's only when you are pained, it's only when you are hit by your inability to recollect, then your search is completely focused in extracting the relevant information, right? So tests and then following it up with reading is what will help you recollect, will retain things for a longer term until the day of your examination. So check if your reading fits into this pattern or not. The last point of today's discussion It's a reflection about your own personality. How do you view yourself? Do you view yourself as someone who's really nervous and anxious all the time, or do you view yourself as someone who's excited about this entire process? Because if you're the nervous kind, if you're the anxious type, you are simply obsessed about the day of the exam. You are always on a constant worry about what will happen to you on the day of prelims. And this fear is going to distract you from your day-to-day preparation. Any random objective question that comes across you, and if you do not know the answer, you immediately stop whatever you are reading, whatever you are doing as per your plan. Immediately you stop that and start looking out for what is the answer for this question, right? And this kind of a pattern is going to be destructive, because on a longer term, after 2 or 3 months, when you look back, you will find that none of your plan has actually worked. Every effort towards studies has been a very sporadic, and it has been a very distracted attempt at studying, right? And when you take a test, or when you approach a question very randomly, if you're not able to solve a question, let's say you face 10 questions and you are the anxious type of an aspirant, you face 10 questions. If you get 5 questions wrong, immediately you start worrying, oh my god, there are 5 more questions which I cannot get right. Where is the study material? How will I get it right? That becomes your obsession. But if you're the excited type, if you are calm, if you really understand the 3 phases of this examination, and if you really understand the reality that merely a success in prelims is no guarantee of an entry in the rank list. There are so many aspirants who would not even make it in a single prelims for 4 or 5 attempts, and the 6th attempt they get into the top 10 ranks. And again, then there are aspirants who would clear all 6 prelims, but not even once would they be able to clear through mains or the personality test. Right? So do not be worried about what immediately lies in the short term in the form of your prelims attempt, but ensure that your attitude towards preparation is intact. Your attitude towards preparation is a long-term strengthening, right? And if you're the excited type, if you're not anxious, if you're not worried, then what happens is the prelims day is after all one other day. It's just like any other ordinary day in the long course of your preparation. Just that instead of taking a test at home, you're going to take it in an examination center determined by UPSC. So for the excited type of an aspirants, every day is similar to the exam day. Every day the experience of taking a test is something to look forward to, right? And that's exactly my state of mind when I looked forward to the prelims as well. Every prelims that I faced was something memorable. In the sense, I used to approach it as if it's some kind of a competition between UPSC and myself, right? It's like a communication between UPSC and myself. So it's like a competition where I tend to outsmart UPSC. So that's the outlook that I develop, because every day whenever I face a question, so that was my similar outlook. It was like an opportunity to know something more, right? And after every test, let's say I attend a 10 question test and 5 questions I know, I'm so happy that, oh, that's so good that I can remember 5 questions perfectly, right? And that also gives me a reassurance that with more studies, with the same set pattern that I have followed to get these 5 questions right, if the same methods can be followed, probably I'll be able to get some more questions right as well. That constant reinforcement is what happens if you are simply excited about the process instead of being worried about this process. So the last introspection that I would want you to do is to question yourself, which type of aspirant you are, and develop a courageous attitude towards this exam. And this courageous attitude towards this exam can only happen if you have a courageous attitude towards life, right? This is not an examination for somebody who's constantly worried about results, who's constantly worried about what will happen if I don't make it, because that worry itself can eat into your preparation, right? So just chill, just think that life is very big than this examination, and even if you do not end up making it to the rank list, there is just so much good things that can happen to you in your life, right? One exam is not going to be the ultimate determinant of what you are. Having that attitude is also another reason of why you will ensure that the process that you will follow in the next couple of months will be the right processes, and that will automatically eventually lead to your success in not only in prelims but also in all the other phases of this exam as well.